Lord Byron was born with a deformed foot that doctors said would make him unlovable. He grew up mocked, teased, and mostly ignored by his own mother. 20 years later, he was the most famous man in England, chased by crowds and worshipped by women who had never even met him. Then one scandal, so shocking that London turned against him overnight, and he fled the country forever. He died fighting in a war that was not even his own, mourned as a hero in a nation that was not his home. How does an outcast become an icon and then die a legend somewhere else entirely? Here is the full truth. Byron was born in London in 1788 with a twisted foot that made him limp for his entire life. His father, a reckless man everyone called Mad Jack Byron, burned through the family fortune and abandoned the family before Byron turned 3. His mother, Catherine, raised him alone in Scotland with almost no money left. Local boys in Aberdeen taunted him constantly. They sometimes chased him through the streets, shouting about his foot. Byron never fully outgrew the shame those years planted in him. She loved him fiercely, but her temper was famous, and she often mocked the very limp that already made him feel like an outsider. Then, when Byron was 10 years old, everything changed with a single letter. A distant relative died without an heir, and the title of Lord Byron passed down to him. Overnight, a poor, self-conscious boy with a limp became a British nobleman, heir to a crumbling old estate called Newstead Abbey. He was sent off to Harrow, then to Cambridge, surrounded by wealthy boys who had never known hunger or shame. Byron had the title now. He did not yet have the confidence, the money, or the polish to match it. Classmates at Harrow noticed the limp before they noticed the title. Byron spent years trying to prove otherwise. He threw himself into boxing, swimming, and reckless dares, determined to prove his body could do anything other boys could do. And underneath the surface, he was hiding something else entirely, a secret that could have destroyed him completely if it had ever become public. But what happened next was something no one at Cambridge could have predicted. The awkward boy with the limp was about to become the most talked-about man in Europe. At Cambridge, Byron discovered that the college banned students from keeping dogs. So he brought a tame bear instead, walked it on a leash around the grounds, and joked that it should apply for a college fellowship. It was a small act of rebellion, but it showed exactly who he was becoming. A man who refused to follow anyone else's rules. Back at Newstead Abbey, he filled the crumbling old halls with a private menagerie. Monkeys, peacocks, even a tame wolf. He reportedly had a monk's skull dug up from the grounds. He had it mounted in silver and used as a drinking cup at dinner parties. By his early 20s, Byron had grown into a strikingly handsome young man, and he knew it. He spent 2 years traveling through Portugal, Spain, Albania, and the Ottoman Empire, chasing adventure far from the judgment of English society. In Albania, the regional ruler Ali Pasha hosted him personally. Byron came home completely taken with what he had seen. He later sat for a famous portrait wearing full Albanian dress, calling it the most striking clothing he had ever seen a man wear. He returned home in 1811 with a long poem describing his travels called Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. He published the first parts in 1812, and almost overnight, he became the most famous writer in Britain. He later joked that he went to bed unknown and woke up a celebrity. The first printing sold out within days. Strangers sent him locks of their hair through the post. Society hostesses fought over who could seat him at dinner first. Newspapers coined a name for the entire frenzy, Byromania. Young men across London copied his loose collars and his carefully careless curls, and portrait painters could barely keep up with demand for his likeness. Every party in London wanted him. Every woman wanted to be seen on his arm. Byron, the boy who had been mocked for his limp, was suddenly the most desired man in the country. He used that fame recklessly. Byron was not choosy, and rumor put his conquests in the hundreds, spanning actresses, countesses, and everyone in between. His most explosive affair was with Lady Caroline Lamb, a married noblewoman who once disguised herself as a page boy just to sneak into his rooms. She later called him mad, bad, and dangerous to know. When he finally ended things, she staged a bonfire outside her own house. She burned his letters and a stuffed effigy of him in front of a crowd of shocked guests. Rumors also swirled about a far darker relationship, one with his own half-sister, Augusta Lee. The two had barely known each other as children. They only reconnected as adults after Byron inherited his title. Their closeness quickly became the subject of open gossip in London's drawing rooms. Byron never confirmed the rumors publicly, but the whispers followed him everywhere, especially after Augusta had a daughter whose true father people quietly questioned. In 1815, hoping to calm the scandal, Byron married a serious, intelligent woman named Annabella Milbank. Byron reportedly cried through parts of the wedding and later admitted he had proposed partly out of desperation to silence the gossip. It was a disaster from the start. Byron drank heavily, mocked his wife's beliefs, and reportedly told her things about his past that terrified her. The couple had one daughter together, Ada, born in December of 1815. Within weeks, Annabella left him and took the baby with her, retreating to her parents' house and refusing to say exactly why. Lawyers got involved. Annabella's family quietly gathered statements from Byron's own household staff and pushed hard for a legal separation instead of a messy public trial. She began spreading claims that reached far beyond ordinary scandal. There were rumors of incest. There were also rumors that Byron slept with men, a crime that could carry the death penalty in England at the time. That second secret was real. Byron had loved men as well as women since his school days, always in total secrecy, always one exposed letter away from prison or worse. By 1816, the rumors had grown too loud to survive, and Byron's finances collapsed right alongside his reputation. He owed enormous debts to tailors, wine merchants, and moneylenders across London. Bailiffs showed up at his house and carted off furniture to cover what he owed. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. Newspapers printed cruel cartoons mocking his failed marriage. The same city that once worshipped him now wanted him gone. Members of Parliament openly discussed prosecuting him. For the first time since inheriting his title, Byron realized that fame alone could not protect him. So Byron did the only thing left to do. He climbed into an enormous custom-built carriage built as a copy of Napoleon's own, boarded a boat at Dover, and left England forever. But here's the part that history books almost never tell you. Exile did not break Byron. It set him free, and it eventually pointed him toward the one act that would define his entire legacy. The rest of the world was about to meet a version of Byron that England never gave itself the chance to see. Byron settled for a while beside Lake Geneva in Switzerland, near his friend, the poet Percy Shelley, and Shelley's future wife Mary. The year 1816 turned out to be freakishly cold across Europe, and the group found themselves trapped indoors for days by endless storms. To pass the time, Byron challenged everyone in the house to write a ghost story. That single dare helped inspire two landmark works of horror, One was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The other was a short story by Byron's own doctor, introducing one of literature's first romantic vampires, modeled directly on Byron himself. That same summer, Byron began an affair with Claire Claremont, part of the Shelley circle, and she gave birth to his daughter Allegra the following year. He sent the little girl to be raised in an Italian convent. She died there of a fever before her 5th birthday. One more loss in a life that never seemed short of them. Byron kept traveling south, eventually settling in Italy for years, first in Venice, then Ravenna, then Pisa. He fell in love with a young Italian countess named Teresa Guiccioli, already married to a man 3 times her age. The two stayed together anyway. Even as Italian society whispered about the arrangement, he kept writing anyway, producing his longest and most ambitious work, a sprawling, satirical poem called Don Juan. He fell into political trouble again, this time supporting Italian revolutionaries called the Carbonari, secretly organized fighters plotting against Austrian control of northern Italy. Byron funded their cause and stored their weapons inside his own home, risking arrest or worse if Austrian authorities ever searched the place. The uprising failed, but it revealed something new about the exiled poet. He was no longer content just writing about heroes. He wanted to become one. That chance arrived in 1823. Greece was fighting a brutal war for independence against the Ottoman Empire, the same empire Byron had once traveled through as a young man. A group of Greek revolutionaries reached out to him for help. Byron did not hesitate. He sold off part of his own English estate to help fund and outfit a Greek fleet. He sailed to Greece himself, determined to fight, not just write checks from a comfortable distance. He arrived at the town of Missolonghi in January of 1824. Picture the scene. A swampy, mosquito-ridden port town, packed with soldiers speaking a dozen different dialects, all waiting for someone to actually lead them. Byron spent his own money to organize a unit of Soliote fighters, fierce mountain warriors from western Greece. He began planning an attack on a nearby Ottoman-held fortress at Lepanto. The poet who once limped through Harrow's hallways was now training soldiers and drawing up battle plans by candlelight. His body, though, was already failing him. In February 1824, Byron collapsed with a violent seizure that left him unable to speak for several minutes. He brushed it off and kept working. Weeks later, after riding out in a sudden rainstorm, he came down with a raging fever that refused to break. His doctors treated him the only way they knew how: repeated bloodletting, a common practice at the time that almost certainly made everything worse. He drifted in and out of consciousness for days, at one point reportedly murmuring the names of his half-sister and his young daughter back in England. On April 19, 1824, Lord Byron died in Missolonghi. He was 36 years old. He never fired a single shot in the war he had crossed the sea to join. News of his death spread through Greece almost instantly, and the reaction stunned everyone. Greek leaders declared 21 days of national mourning for a British poet who had barely spent months in their country. Cannons fired in his honor across towns he had never even visited. Cities and streets across Greece still carry his name today. To the Greek people, Byron was not just a wealthy foreigner who donated money. He was a man who had given up comfort, and ultimately his life, for a cause that was never his own. His death did something his writing alone could never have done. It turned European sympathy toward the Greek cause almost overnight, helping push Britain, France, and Russia toward eventually supporting Greek independence. Back in England, the reaction was completely different. The old scandal that once drove him out of the country still clung to his name. When his body was shipped home, Westminster Abbey refused to bury him there, calling his personal life too immoral for the honor. He was buried instead in a small family vault near Newstead Abbey, the crumbling estate he had inherited as a boy. Crowds still lined the roads to watch his funeral procession pass, even as the Abbey's own doors stayed shut to him. It would take 145 years before England finally placed a memorial to him inside that same abbey. Byron's legacy did not stop at politics or poetry either. His daughter, Ada, grew up almost entirely without him, raised by a mother determined to steer her as far from her father's chaos as possible. Ironically, that path led Ada toward mathematics. Working alongside an inventor named Charles Babbage, Ada Lovelace wrote what many historians consider the world's first computer program. It was a set of instructions for a machine that would not actually exist for another century. The scandalous poet's daughter became one of the founding minds of computer science, a legacy Byron never lived to imagine, and his writing left its own enormous mark on literature. He created a new kind of hero for the modern age, brooding, flawed, brilliant, and always a little dangerous. Writers still call this archetype the Byronic hero, and its fingerprints run through countless novels, films, and characters that followed him. Later writers openly borrowed the mold for characters like Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights and Mr. Rochester in Jane Eyre. Brooding men shaped directly in Byron's own image, all the way through to the anti-heroes still filling movie screens today. So, here is the real question this story has been building toward. How does a man mocked for a limp, exiled in disgrace, and dead before a single battle end up remembered as a hero? A hero in one country and erased from a church in another? The answer was never really about Greece or about England. It was about what happens when the world finally needs the very things it once punished a man for having. Byron spent his entire life caught between two identities: the disgraced nobleman England wanted to forget, and the selfless hero Greece chose to remember forever. In the end, distance decided which version of Byron would survive. The country that rejected him buried its judgment for over a century before it could admit what he had become. The country he barely knew turned him into a legend within weeks of his death. Neither version was ever the whole truth. He was the same complicated, wounded, brilliant man in both places. He was still the same boy from Harrow's hallways who never stopped trying to prove his body, and his name did not define him. Maybe that is the real lesson underneath a life this loud. The world rarely judges people for who they actually are. It judges them by how far away it happens to be standing when the final story gets told. That is the real story hiding underneath the title of this video. What changed was not Byron. What changed was which country was willing to look past the scandal and see the sacrifice standing behind it. His shadow reached far beyond his own death. It reached through a war he barely lived to see finished, and through a daughter who built an entirely new kind of future out of the wreckage of his old one. The boy who once hid a limp beneath his trousers ended up walking taller in death than he ever managed to in life. If this story changed the way you think about reputation and about how far a single act of sacrifice can rewrite a legacy, hit the like button. It helps more people find this story.